Okay, so let's see this particular passage. So, what does this passage say? So, it generally starts with scholarly work in critical human geography is an epistemological critique of the discipline, right? I'm sure that a lot of the students would have just said that what is this, right? I mean, like, and would have lost in the initial first sentence and lost the battle here only, right? But anyhow, let's see what this particular sentence is saying. So they're saying that the scholar work in critical human geography is an epistemological critique of the discipline, right? So they say that the critical human geography, okay, they don't just study space, okay, it questions how knowledge in geography is produced. So epistemology is basically, you can say, it's a study of knowledge, okay. So scholarly work in critical human geography is an epistemological critique of the discipline. So it basically, you can say that it kind of challenges the foundational assumption of the field, right? So, critical human geography don't just study space, so they don't study space, okay? It questions how knowledge in geography is produced. So, this is what they basically is talking about. It calls into the question the validity of the dominant positivist paradigm in geography and its use of the scientific method, right? So, scholar work in critical human geography is an epistemological critique of the डिसिप्लिन जो क्रिटिकल ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी पे जो स्कॉलरली वर्क है वो उसका critique है discipline and what is that, right? So it calls into question the validity of the dominant positivist paradigm in geography and its use in the scientific method. So they say that the geography, okay, so the mainstream, I would say, the mainstream model in geography has been positivism, okay. Now what is this positivism? Is that belief that only objective or let's say measurable facts matter, right? Now they say that critiques generally or the critical geographers, so this is no critical geographers, they doubt whether the scientific approach is truly valid for studying humans and society, right? So it calls into question the validity of the dominant positivist paradigm in geography and its use in the scientific method. It begins with critique. It begins this critique by examining the relation between the researcher and their research objects or subjects, right? So basically, what they say is that the first target, we can say, it begins so the first target of the critic is that the researchers are separate, okay, that the researchers are, you can say, they are separate, they are neutral observers, right? So critical geographers somewhere argue that researchers are always entangled with what they study, right? So how can, I mean, like, the researchers be a separate or a neutral observer, right? So basically we can see that this particular paragraph, it's actually talking about the that scholarly work in critical human geography is an critique of the discipline. So जो भी उन्होंने scholarly work critical human geography में करा है, so it's a kind of, it's the author is not really happy with it, okay. They say that why the author is not happy, because it calls into the question the validity of the dominant positive paradigm in geography and in use of the scientific method, right? So they say that critical geographers doubt maybe that whether the scientific approach is valid or not, right? And then they say that the first critique begins by that the researchers are separate and neutral, but critical researchers somewhere argue that the examining the relation between the researcher and their research objects or subjects. So they say that researchers are always entangled with what they study. Okay. Now let's see what the another lines is talking about. So positivism idealize the concept of the objective researcher who, while conducting a project, distance themselves as much as possible from research subjects and the pressures or social forces with the discipline, right? So they say that there is some one concept of positivism, right? And this positivism, right? So positivism, they say that objective researcher or you can say a good researcher, okay, so they are supposed to be kind of distance themselves, so they need to be detached, okay, they need to be unbiased and they need to be unaffected by society or the people they study. So that is what they are saying, right? So positivism idealize the concept of this objective researcher who, while conducting a project, distance themselves as much as possible from research subjects and the pressure on the social forces within the discipline. So positivists say कि researcher जो है वो सेपरेट रहता है. ओके, so there is the researcher is kind of detached, he is unbiased, and he is not unaffected by the society or maybe the people around it. It assumed and required that personal bias be left out of the research process, and that disinterestedness guided the ethical conduct of a scholar who searches only for facts, not opinions. Okay, now they say that one of the positivist ethic is that you need to also exclude this personal bias. Okay, so अब अपने personal values or feelings इनको भी exclude करो. Okay, and then they say that a research process out of the research process, and that disinterestedness guided the and the ethical conduct of a scholar, or the scholars must only chase for facts. Okay, they should not focus on opinion. So this is what the positivism is saying. Okay, so basically positivism is saying कि आप unbiased होके करो. Okay, neutral होके करो, आप swayed मत हो, detached हो आप चीजों से, पर्सनल ओपिनियन को भी साइड में रखो. ओके, फैक्ट्स पे फोकस करो, ओपिनियन पे फोकस मत करो. In contrast to such an objectivist model, Marxist geographers emphasizes that scientific inquiry is always a product of the. I'm so sorry. Okay, so Marxist geographers emphasize that scientific inquiry is always a product of the society in which it is produced, and thus reflects and is influenced by power structures and dominant ideologies. Okay, so what they are saying is that the Marxist view is that I mean, like in contrast to such an objectivist, एक ये तो आ गया आपका positivist का model. Okay, and यही positivist का model is being called as an objectivist model. So in contrast to the positivist model, okay, there is a Marxist view. Okay, and the Marxist view say that science is not neutral. Okay, they are saying this, no, that scientific inquiry is always a product of the society. Okay, so it is not neutral. It is always shaped by the social and political environment. Okay, power structures and the dominant ideologies. So they say that, and knowledge, basically they say that this geography implies that scientific inquiries is influenced by power structures and ideologies. Okay, so that's the case, and it is almost impossible for the researcher to be unbiased and objective. Now we are getting into the thing. Okay, so they say that it's almost impossible कि researcher क्या हो, unbiased and objective. All right, so there are, in this passage we can see that there are two views, where the positivists say that they should be unbiased, they should be objective, but then the Marxist view is a contrast which says that there is always a product of the society, so they cannot be working independent, right? Moreover, feminist geographers note that knowledge production in academia traditionally has been in the hands of heterosexual men, right? Now we get into the another viewpoint. Okay, so feminists kinds of add that historically, or since history, okay, I mean, like since traditionally, they would say rather. Okay, so they say that white this is in the hands of this, right? So geographers note that the knowledge production in academia has been in the hands of heterosexual man. Okay, so they say that since historically heterosexual men have dominated the knowledge creation part. Okay, so knowledge production is kind of knowledge creation part. Okay, what constitutes knowledge and what counts as the appropriate method was determined by these men. Okay, so they say that generally the men set the rules of what is real knowledge, and kind of with what is the appropriate method. Okay, which should be considered, or which should be determined, or which is an appropriate method, or which method is legitimate, something like this, right? Now feminist theorists argue that men's research has been centered predominantly on goal oriented practical data gathering, and has discounted intuitive and situational knowledge as invalid, subjective and soft. Okay, now, what these feminist theorists believe that this heterosexual men dominated theories. Okay, or the research. Okay, rather research, not the theories. Okay, so they are based on kind of core data. Okay, so they say that they are predominantly goal oriented, practical data gathering. Okay, and has discounted intuitive and situational knowledge as invalid, subjective and south. Okay, so they say that for them that the major focus is on data. Okay, and they believe in rationality. Okay, not on intuition and not on situational knowledge. Okay, so this is what they say, right? So they say that they dismiss the intuitive. Okay, they dismiss the situational knowledge. Okay, context specific knowledge maybe. Okay, and they don't care about emotions, in short we can say, okay, because they are the practical data gateway. So that is the case. Now other models of scientific inquiry that are more personal, subjective, qualitative, and even decisively political must be explored and permitted as valid research, right? Now what are these feminist demands? That there should be an acceptance of an alternative view, right, in which kind of maybe the personal knowledge, okay, the kind of, you can say, qualitative data, subjective, okay, so all these things, okay, and even decisively political, so maybe the political perspective, okay, should be permitted as a valid research, right? तो पहले वाले में उसने कुछ पॉजिटिविज्म वर्सेस मार्क्सिज्म बोला था, इसमें उसने ओपिनियन दिया है फेमिनिस्ट का, जिसमें वो बोल रहे हैं कि मेल डोमिनेटेड है, मेल डोमिनेटेड है, दे फोकस ऑन डेटा एंड रैशनैलिटी, ओके, दे से और भी ऑल्टरनेटिव मेथड्स को एक्सप्लोर करना चाहिए, राइट? Now, critical human geography also questions the process of abstraction and reduction of model making and its supposed objectivity, right? So now they say that critical human geography जो है, it also questions the process of abstraction, okay? So abstraction is, you can call it as maybe something abstract models, okay? And reduction of model making and its supposed objectivity. So they say that the critical human geography critiques the idea of, let's say, reducing the human capacity complexity, okay, and reducing the human complexity into something abstract ideas, okay. So basically, what the model claims is that critical human geography also questions the process of abstraction and reduction of model making and its supposed objectivity, okay. So maybe they say that they are kind of questioning it. Okay, let's see. Let's read the further lines to figure it out. Traditionally, the behavioral geography of the 1960s used the concept of rational man and his goal-oriented behavior as the starting point of inquiry and sought to model and standardize expressions of human spiritual behavior. Okay, so they say that kind of maybe traditionally, okay, there were the behavioral geography, okay, and they behavioral geography kya assume karti thi, that the humans are kind of rational, okay, and they always work on the goal orient, they show this goal oriented behavior, okay, and they say that as the starting point of the inquiry and sought to model and standardize expressions of human spatial behavior, okay. So they say that this kind of was the basis of many spatial behavior models, okay. Now Marxist and feminist thought question the ability and reality of decision making on a purely rational basis and emphasize that behavioralist models are insufficient insofar as they do not account for spontaneous or intuitive behavior, right? Now this is easy, so we can see that the Marxist and feminist, so we saw here that, right, Marxist was against the objectivity and the unbiased, okay. So they say that Marxist and feminist critics say that humans don't always act rationally, okay. So they don't always act rationally, okay. And somewhere they say that the behavior includes spontaneity, the behavior includes the intuitiveness, right? So that's the case, right? And maybe they sort of and emphasize the behaviorist models are insufficient insofar as they do not account for spontaneous or intuitive behavior. Also, they question whether actors are always aware of fully conscious of all their opinions, right? So they say that sometimes the people who is the involved here, okay, they may not even realize that all their choices are being, let's say, are they fully conscious of their opinion, matlab unko kya 100% are they aware of their opinions, right? So this is also not being written, right? Now instead, critical geographers argue that individuals often unconsciously choose from options that are predetermined or selected for them based on the society or ideology which they live, right? So basically they say that the choices are kind of the individuals, okay, they unconsciously choose from options, okay. And how do they unconsciously choose from options? That depends upon the society they live in and what kind of the ideologies that is being served there, right? Now from the last paragraph, so we can see here that much more than a critique of scientific approaches, critical human geography offers a variety of methods to provide critical analysis of society, right? So they say that it's much more than this. So critical geography does not only kind of, let's say, they criticize, okay? So much more than a critic of scientific approaches, critical human geography offers a variety of methods to provide critical analysis of society, okay? So they say that the critical geography don't only criticize, it also proposes a new approaches to critically analyze the society. Most important in the methodological approach is the argument that all knowledge and spatial characteristics of reality are socially constructed. Okay, and then they say that the most important of all them is that you can say that the argument that all knowledge of reality are socially constructed. So they say that reality, spatially, this you can say spatial reality, reality. Okay, so they say that they are basically not natural. Okay, but this is something which is socially produced and may be shaped by the society, culture, ideology, etc. Okay, Marxist but particular post-structuralist approaches in critical human geography seeks to deconstruct taken for granted notions of space. Okay, so they say that these approaches of Marxist, but particularly post-structuralist approaches in critical human geography seek to deconstruct taken for granted notions for space. So these approaches challenges the assumption about space. Okay, showing how they are kind of, let's say, they are historically constructed, maybe, right. Now the predominant tool of this constructions is discourse analysis. So they say that the main method analyzing text or language and discourse is to see how the meaning about space is created. Discourse analysis looks at how text attach meaning to certain places and how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power, right? So they say that discourse analysis looks at how text attach meaning to certain places, right? कि अगर हम डिस्कोर्स एनालिसिस करते हैं, ओके, हम लाइक रिपोर्ट्स वगैरह की एनालिसिस करते हैं, ओके, then we can feel that how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions or power. Okay, so I mean, like, they kind of, let's say, agar uh, I mean, like the discourse analysis. I'm not thinking of an example right now, but discourse analysis looks at how the text attach meaning to the certain places and how the meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power. कि मतलब अगर हम कुछ words की analysis करेंगे तो हमें पता चलेगा कि वो जो words जो created है ना, okay, so they give certain places a specific meanings, okay, that is maybe to benefit a kind of a, I mean, like, to represents a certain positions of power, maybe. Okay, so intentionally they do that. In other words, it links text and the meaning they give to the place with the people who created this text and their position of power, right? So they say that discourse analysis traces, okay, who creates the meaning and how their social and political power shapes it. Now, this is done to show how power is used to give meaning to places and to silence other text and meaning. So they say that basically it's about how the dominant narratives, or you can say the discourses, okay, they kind of I mean, like, they give meaning to the places, okay, and sometimes to silence the other text and its meaning, okay. But overall, yes, we can see that this looks like a slightly tricky passage, okay. Let's understand what could be the essence of the passage as a whole, right? So initially, we start with a criticism on positivism, okay. So it start with a criticism on a positivism, okay, which, and what was the positivism all about? So positivism was about that the objectives should be that the object that the entire this researchers, okay, he should be objective, detached and rational, okay. Then we get into the Marxist. So we can, in case if I want to give you the main heading of the paragraph, right? So it starts with a criticism on positivist, okay, and then they say that positivists, they believe that they should be kind of they did not focus a personal bias, they need to be distance themselves, okay. Then uska contrast किसने किया था? Marxist ने, okay. So Marxist geographic argues that scientific inquiry is always a product of society, okay. So they say that the research is shaped by the power structures and the ideology, यही इसमें था ना, dominant ideologies and power structures, okay. Then came the feminist geographers, and then they say that it's the मेल डोमिनेटेड academia है, okay, so heterosexual men का dominated है, okay, and this heterosexual men dominated, they are predominantly focus on a goal oriented, okay, practical data gathering, okay, and they discount intuitive and situational knowledge as invalid, right? So उनके लिए it's just the rationality, the hard data, okay, and they do not take into the care the subjective and intuitive knowledge, okay. Then came that the critical geographers actually kind of challenge the abstract models, okay. So what they challenge here is basically this concept of a rational man, okay, because they ignore that real messy human decision making are being shaped by the society, okay. So that's what they say here, no, that whether the actors are always fully conscious. Instead, critical geographer argues that individuals unconsciously choose from options that are predetermined or selected from them based on the society and ideology which they live in. Okay, and at last they say that the most importantly, this critical human geographers. Okay, so they kind of you can say stresses that knowledge and space are socially constructed. So knowledge and spatial characteristics of reality are socially constructed, okay. And then they say ki, for this what we need to do is to do the discourse analysis, okay. And when we do the discourse analysis, it reveals that how power creates dominant meaning of places, okay. So how I mean like how the power creates some of the places to be dominant and give a dominant meaning to the places, okay, while silencing the others. So this is what this paragraph is. So in short, we can say that the critical human geographers, okay, so they kind of argue that geography is never neutral, okay? It is never objective, okay? Rather, they say that it is socially, politically, ideologically constructed, okay? And at last, it calls for a more inclusive, reflexive approaches to studying space, okay? So that's basically the case. The space is basically because the geography is there. So I hope you got it. So this is the broader idea. So they argue that geography कभी भी जो space है वो कभी भी neutral नहीं है, okay. Rather it is socially, politically and ideologically constructed, okay. And so we need to be more like reflective, okay, power approaches. So that was basically the main idea of the passage, okay. So with this understanding, let's actually get into the questions here. So very first question is that which of the following sequence of words or phrases best describes the ones endorsed by critical human geography, okay. So endorsed by critical human geography. So let's see this particular thing. So कौन सा चीज है जो critical human geography endorse करेगा, okay. So first says Marxist geographers, okay. So and feminist geographers and abstraction and reduction, okay. So the passage does not mention that Marxist and feminist geographers, okay, they critique objectivity and male dominant science, okay. So it also, yes, no doubt that it also critiques the abstraction and reduction, that model making wala thing, okay. But these are discussed. They are not a part of, you can say, a critique of the positivism, okay. And neither these are the central endorsed approach of critical human geography, right? So ये वो चीज नहीं है. I mean, like, I hope you are getting this, what I mean to say here, right? So problem with this option is that the Marxist and feminist geographers, they were discussed in the passage, okay, but they're not presented as a critique of traditional approaches. So जो endorsed by critical human geographer था वो यहाँ पे था, okay. So that's the case, right? So यहाँ पे they are presented more as a critique of traditional approaches rather than a core of a critical human geography itself. So that's the case. Abstraction and reduction was definitely mentioned, okay. But in the question, in the context of being questioned and critique rather than being endorsed, endorsed है वो किसको prefer करेगा ना, okay. So वो किस चीज को prefer करेगा, वो post structuralist approaches को prefer करेगा, okay. For यहाँ पे देखो उन्होंने लिखा है, देखो they kind of post-structuralist ki we just read it right now, right? Yeah, so this is here, right? So most important, the methodological approach is the argument that all knowledge and spatial characteristics of reality are social constructed. Marxist but particularly post-structuralist approaches in critical human geography seek to deconstruct taken for granted notion of space, okay. So they say that they seek to deconstruct taken for granted notions of space, okay. So critical human geographers will definitely going to endorse this thing, okay. वो मार्क्सिस्ट और फेमिनिस्ट को इंडोर्स करेगा मुझे पता नहीं है ये चीज, राइट. So वो डिस्कस थे एज अ क्रिटिक ऑफ ट्रेडिशनल अप्रोचेस. ओके, ये दिस वाज इन द कोर फिलोसफी ऑफ द क्रिटिकल ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी, राइट? So I hope you're getting it right. But post-constructivist approaches को उसने कहा है कि they seek to disconstruct taken for notion granted. So they will definitely going to employ post-structuralist methods to understand the spatial characteristics of reality. So definitely, right? Discourse analysis, yes, this was also one of the endorsement. Okay, so they say that discourse analysis look at how texts attach meaning to certain places and how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power, right? So we can see here that the kind of the writings that the critical human geographers, okay, so they say that it examines how texts attach meaning to the meaning, right? So in other words, it links text and the meaning they give place with the people who created these texts and their position of power. Okay, so from here we can say that they will going to endorse the discourse analysis. Okay, because this the discourse analysis is described as a kind of predominant tool of deconstructions used by the human geographers, right? I mean, like the human geographers, right? So that's definitely the case. The socially constructed, yes, this is also one of the idea. Okay, so they say that the predominant tool of disconstruction discourse analysis. Okay, and in other words, it links text with the text in this. Yeah, here it is, right? So much more than just a critique of the scientific approaches, critical human geography offers a variety of methods to provide critical analysis of the society, and most important is the methodological approach is the argument that all knowledge and spatial characteristics of the reality are socially constructed. Okay, so something about socially constructed we can see here ना. इंडोर्स क्या करा था, इंडोर्स यहाँ पे करा था ना कि मोर देन जस्ट अ क्रिटिक क्रिटिकल ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी ऑफर्स अ वैरायटी ऑफ मेथड्स. सो इंडोर्समेंट यहाँ पे हुआ था, तीनों का हुआ था. सो दैट्स द रीजन आई थिंक. सो दिस वाज एन इजी क्वेश्चन यार. ओके, इनको इंडोर्स नहीं किया था उसने. नाउ लेट्स से epistemological. So now while this epistemological critique of the discipline, okay, it was being mentioned. Okay, it relates to the approach of the critical human geography. But let's see, positivism. Okay, positivism to nahi tha na yaar. Okay, positivism is a concept that is criticized by the critical human geography. They weren't happy with this, right? So ye to outrightly on the grounds of positivism khatam hi ho sakta hai. Now behavioralist models. So let's see, behaviorist models, subjective and qualitative intuitive behavior. Okay, now behavioralist models are criticized by critical human geography. Okay, so they say that behavioralist वाला model नहीं करना है. Okay, so ये criticize हुआ था यहाँ पे. They weren't being endorsed here, right? Now subjective and qualitative and intuitive behavior are definitely mentioned. Okay, but वो कहाँ पे mention था, वो यहाँ पे mention था. Okay, but it is not a concept which is being endorsed by the critical human geography. They offers a variety of methods to provide critical analysis. So यहाँ पे endorsement की बात है ना. So that's the reason that the B is the correct answer. I hope you got it correct, right? Now let's see the option number two, that what the option number two is saying, or question number two is saying. So it says that each of the following inferences about critical human geography is supported by the passage except, right? कि सारी जो ये इन्फ्लुएंसेस है क्रिटिकल ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी की वो पैसेज में सपोर्टेड है एक्सेप्ट, राइट? नाउ इट सेज दैट it undermines the assumptions of behaviorism, right? So this option is supported by the passage. Okay, so they say जहां पे उन्होंने डिस्कस करा था behaviorism in contrast to this. So we see here, behaviorism. I'm not getting. Yes, traditionally the behavioral geography of the 1960s, okay, under the concept of rational manner is goal-oriented behavior as the starting point of inquiry and sought to model and standardize expressions of human spatial behavior, right? So again, we can see that definitely yes, it undermines the assumptions of this, right? In case if I can get a direct line for you to figure out this particular thing. Just a second. Okay, so yeah, so they somewhere says that where they talk about the Marxist and feminist. You just read it right now. Yeah, so yes, Marxist and feminist thought question the ability and reality of decision making on purely rational basis and emphasize that behavioral models are insufficient so far as they do not take an account for spontaneous or intuitive behavior. So yes, of course, okay. So this critical geographics, because they kind of they were of the opinion of the Marxist and the feminism, right? So we can say that it is the critical geography critiques the behaviorism. So on the grounds of the example of the Marxist and you can call it the other one, the feminism view, right? So critical human geography does indeed undermine the assumptions of behaviorism, particularly the idea of modeling and you can say the standardizing. Okay, so modeling and standardizing human spatial behavior, right? So that's the case. Okay, the passage says that makes it, this no Marxist and feminist thought this thing. So directly, right? Now it counters the masculine model of science. Yes, this is absolutely correct. Okay, this option is also supported by the passage. So feminist geographers ने यही किया था ना. Okay, so they say that the feminist geographers note that the knowledge production academia traditionally has been in the hands of heterosexual man. Okay, and what they do is that they focus, the feminist theorists argue that the men's research has been centrally predominated on goal oriented, okay, practical data gathering and dismissing and situational knowledge as invalid, subjective and soft, right? So this we can say that this highlights how critical human geography counters the dominant masculine you can say models, okay, and supports more diverse. So this paragraph, right, more diverse is ko hatake. So this was also one of the critical inferences that we can draw about the critical human geography, right? Now it supports the particularization of human behavior. Okay, now they say that critical human geographies, okay, somewhere here, okay, they say that the critical human geographies emphasis on the social construction of this space, okay, and maybe we can say on the critique of a rational decision making, okay, and exploration of a more personal and a qualitative form of scientific inquiries aligns with the particularization of a human behavior. Okay, so it seeks to understand that the human behavior in its complexity, okay, they want to understand it on the basis of the situation, they want to understand it on the basis of the intuition, okay, rather than just reducing it to the abstract models ना. तो यही पे वो बात कर रहे थे इस चीज की, where they say that traditionally you can say that let me figure out exact line, right? So I mean it's not something that is being given, but yes, either यहाँ पे that critical human geography also crosses the also questions the process of abstraction and reduction of model making and its supposed objectivity, right? So यहाँ पे somewhere we can understand, I mean like this option is something that is supported throughout the passage. Okay, so they say that passage highlights, maybe you can say subjectivity, okay, they highlights the spontaneity, they highlights the intuition, they highlight the you can say kind of unconscious decision making, right? So उन सब से we can say that critical human geography emphasis on the social construction, okay, and exploring of more personal and qualitative forms. So we can say from this that it supports the particularization of human behavior. Okay, but why the option number C cannot be the answer? So it says that it underscores outcome driven decision making model. Okay, but the option is not supported by the passage, no. Okay, so the critical human geography questions the traditional approaches. So traditional approaches kya tha, that a human kya hai, they are rational, okay, and they were goal oriented, right? So that is the case. Now the passage explicitly critiques the concept of rational man and a goal oriented behavior. Okay, so arguing that such models do not account for intuitive or situational aspects. So यही तो उसने बोला था ना कि यहाँ पे they do not focus on intuition और ये वाला चीज का यहाँ पे इन्होंने they talked about it, right, where they talked about here also, right? So intuition और इसकी बात नहीं करी है, right? So we can say that instead critical human geography emphasizes that individuals who often choose unconsciously based on society and ideological in this thing, right? This was directly given. I mean, like, I'm like, you have gone through this particular thing, so you'll be able to understand, right? अगर मेरे को इसको बहुत आपको exact line बतानी हो, so we can see from here, right? So traditionally, the behavioral geography of the 1960s used the concept of rational man and his goal-oriented behavior as the starting point of inquiry and sought to model and standardize expressions of human spatial behavior. Okay, Marxists and feminists thought to question the ability and reality of decision making on a purely rational basis and emphasize that the mirror are insufficient insofar. Okay, also and as they do not account for spontaneous or intuitive, right? So it underscores outcome driven decision making models. So the critical human geography rejects, okay? So underscores is support. So they do not support outcome driven models, but rather they reject. So that's the reason that the C is your correct answer. I hope you got this from this lines, right? Now, each of the following, if true, would strengthen the arguments of critical human geography. Sorry, would strengthen the arguments of critical geography except. Okay, so let's see this particular question, that what is it asking basically. Okay, so the question is asking that each of the following, if strengthen the argument of the critical geography except. Now, option number one says that even though we all have multiple identities, we are the same people in different contexts. Okay. Now, this will not going to strengthen the arguments of critical geography. Okay. Because the critical human geography का focus किस पे था. Okay. So they focus on identities. Okay. And knowledge that is are socially constructed. Okay, and they say that it should be shift depending on the context, power, and discourse. Okay, so saying that we are the same people in different contexts, okay, actually goes against this idea, because what does this idea says that maybe we are stable, we are unified self that does not change. Okay, so अगर ऐसा था तो उसका ये सारी चीजें जहाँ पे वो बोला था इंडिविजुअल पे फोकस होना चाहिए, so they say instead critical geographers argue that individuals who often unconsciously choose from options that are predetermined or selected for them on the basis of society and ideology where they live in, right? So this is what they are saying. So telling them ki this is that we all have multiple identities and we are the same people. Okay, so this goes against, right? This goes against, this does not align with the principles of the critical human geography. Okay, so they emphasize that the social constructed nature, okay, है स्पेस का सोशली कंस्ट्रक्टेड नेचर है जो इस पैराग्राफ में से बोला है, but the complexity of human behavior, okay, and the influence of society, okay, so they say that ideological factors also. So by saying that we are the same in different contexts actually contradict the emphasis on context specific understanding. Okay, so that's not the case. Now, scholarship can be used to resist dominant representations, right? Now, this statement would going to strengthen the arguments of critical human geography. Okay, now why we're going to strengthen is that because they say that discourse analysis, kind of we can see here that discourse analysis looks at how texts attach meaning to certain places and how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power. Okay, so we can see here that discourse analysis is done to show how power is used to give meaning to places. Okay, in fact here, in others words, linking text and the meaning, they give people places with the people who created these texts. This is done to show how power is used to give meaning to the places and to silence other text and meanings. Okay, so we can see that critical geographers, okay, see scholarship as a tool challenge dominant powers and meanings. Okay, because of this discourse analysis, this can be inferred, right? I hope you got this, that why this is not a case. A slightly tricky inference for you to figure out, right? But the statement would strengthen. The passage highlights the use of post-constructalist approaches. Okay, post-constructalist approaches of and discourse analysis and critical analysis to deconstruct the dominant representation. So critical geographers use these tools to challenge the traditional assumptions and power structure. So this alignment will go, okay, this will go that to scholarships can be used to resist dominant representation. Now there is no quantitative method that exists objectively that exists that objectively measures intuitive knowledge, right? So there is no quantitative method that exists that objectively measures intuitive knowledge. Okay, so this definitely they will agree. Okay, this strengthens the arguments of the critical reasoning. So the passage mentions the criticism of traditional approaches. Okay, so traditional approaches क्या उनका criticism था? एक criticism था कि वो intuitive नहीं है. Okay, वो situational knowledge को नहीं consider करते हैं. Okay, वो subjective नहीं है. So, asserting that there is no quantitative method, sorry, okay, to measure intuitive knowledge supports the critical geography argument for a more comprehensive, or you can say a qualitative based approach, right? So they say, and moreover, this line feminist wali they discounted predominantly this, okay. So are personal, subjective, and qualitative. So other models of scientific theory that are personal, subjective, or qualitative, and even decisively political must be explored and permitted as valid research, right? So from this we can see that they would not they believe that there is no quantitative method, but rather there should be a qualitative method. Now, geographical knowledge does not consist of transparent and value free truths, right? Now this is also true. Okay, this is also would going to strengthen the arguments of critical knowledge, right? So they say here that somewhere there was a line, no, that knowledge is and spatial characteristics of here, right? So they say here that most important is the methodological approach is that all knowledge and the spatial characteristics of reality are socially constructed. Okay, so this says that geographical knowledge does not consist of transparent and value free truths, right? So this is also something that the critical geographers, so this is I mean, like, I would say that this is actually the core beliefs of the critical human geography. The passage emphasizes that knowledge production, including your, you can say, geographical knowledge, reflects societal power structures and dominant ideologies. So the claim that geographical knowledge is not transparent, okay, or value free supports this perspective as it aligns with the idea that all knowledge is influenced by social context. So definitely the A is the correct answer. Now let's see the question number 4, maybe. Okay, so let's see this question number 4. So question number 4 is saying that discourse analysis look at how texts attach meaning to certain places and how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power, right? If this statement is true, then each of the following statement must also be true except, right? So let's understand what this particular sentence is saying first of all. So they say that discourse analysis look at how texts attach meaning to certain places and how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power, right? So they say that the meaning in text, okay, that whenever the texts are being picked, okay, so there's some hidden meaning in them, right? And they are created deliberately. So these meanings, they are being created purposely to represent certain positions of power, okay? So those in power, sorry, let me just, okay. So yeah, so those in power basically decide that how these positions are being created or they are being described, right? And then they say that discourse analysis look at how texts attach meaning to certain places and how these meanings are purposely created to represent certain positions of power. Okay, so language, you can say, or discourses rather, I would say. So they actually shapes, okay, that how people understand the places. So this is basically what they are calling about. Okay. Now let's go through all of the options. So they say that meaning are not accidental. This is definitely okay. This is true. Okay. So each of the following must also be true. So they say that these meanings are purposely created. So purposely created. So meanings are not accidental. This is definitely. Part structures are reflected in the language. So this is also given. Okay. So they say that meanings are being created to represent certain positions of power, right? So we can say that language reflects kind of the or the power structures are reflected in languages, certain positions of power. They're representing that the way something is described can affect how people think about it, right? Now this is also true, this is also given, right? Now they say that discourse analysis looks at how texts attach meaning to certain places. Okay, so the when the text attach meaning to certain places, so we can say that in case if the place is dangerous, okay, then people we अगर हमने उस place को दे दिया कि dangerous है, okay, so people will going to perceive that place as a dangerous, okay, we call that place as religious, so people will going to perceive that place as a religious, okay. So discourse analysis look at how text attach meaning to certain places. So the way something is described can affect how people think about it. Okay. They say that the textual interpretations are quantifiable. Okay. So this is not supported at all, right? So they say here that more than just this. Okay. There was line here, maybe. Okay. In other words, okay, basically what they say is that the discourse analysis, it is more interpretative, okay. I mean, like, it's interpretative, but it is not quantifiable, okay. And there they say that there was line, I'm like other models jahan pe wo yeah, so other models of scientific inquiry that are more personal, object, subjective, qualitative, and even decisively politically must be explored and permitted as a valid research. Okay, so they say that what should be focused is a qualitative, what textual interpretations quantifiable. No, that wasn't the idea, that is the case. Okay, critical human geography through discourse analysis treats meaning as a socially constructed and qualitative, not something that is measurable with numbers. Okay, so that's the case that the fourth card D is the answer. I hope you got this passage. A comparatively difficult passage, I mean, like difficult to comprehend also, but again you should keep I mean, like, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So that's the case scenario. All the best.